Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 115. Let's begin with the connected to our time. We're now in the beginning of Parsha Emor, this coming Shabbos, and it's also Yud Gimmel Iyar, the Yartzeit of Rabbi Yisrael Aryeh Leib, the Rebbe's youngest brother, who passed away in Tovshin Yud Beis on this day, Yud Gimmel Iyar. So this would be his, would be Yud Beis till we are now in Ayin Vov. So we're talking about 64 years. So, and a little housekeeping before we begin, and that is to announce again that if you value this MyLife Chassidus Applied, please subscribe to our new YouTube channel of the same name to help keep these videos coming and to share them with others. You can also, as always, submit your questions anonymously at our special forum, meaningfullife.com/mylife, as well as read the essays of the new contest as they're being posted, both by subscribing to our weekly newsletter or by going to MyLife, to meaningfullife.com/mylife essays or MyLife contest. meaningfullife.com/contest. So, Parshas Emor and Yud Gimmel Iyar, we'll begin with that. Parsha Emor is, of course, a parsha that has in it many themes. I want to talk about one, especially connected with Yud Gimmel Iyar. In Tovshin Chav Hei, it was Parsha Emor was Yud Gimmel Iyar, like this year, Tovshin Chav Hei, and the Rebbe said that a Maimer, which later he edited and was published in the year Tovshin Nun, B'nigdashti b'teich b'nei Yisrael, ani Hashem magdishchem. So this refers to, this is with a verse where we talk about Kiddush Hashem. Of course, there are many verses in the Torah that talk about sanctifying God's name, but this is the pasuk that we learn, B'nigdashti b'teich b'nei Yisrael, how God is sanctified. And was always used this verse, unfortunately also in very bad times, when Jews with their lives were sanctified in the name of God. This is the verse that's used about the concept of Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbe said a Maimer then, and as usual in the themes of Yud Gimmel Iyar, which we'll soon discuss the different elements of how one sanctifies God's name, especially the two types of Aved, Tzadikim and Balei Tshuva. Now, in that, last week we spoke about the Torah of the Chassidus interprets Kadeshim Tiyu, and the Medrash says as a question mark, whether we can be as holy as the divine, and says Yochel Kameni as a question, and Chassidus interprets it, yes, Yochel Kameni b'nechusa, meaning yes, that's the case. Ki kodeshoni, kedushasi l'mayla migdush haschem, that the divine holiness above comes from us, down below. Now, without Chassidus, it can seem sacrilegious and even heretic to say something of this nature. Why? Because what does it mean? We are making God holy. God is holy. There's a simple interpretation that He is the Holy One. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We say it every time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Blessed is He, the Holy One, HaKadosh. And nothing else is as holy as God. And yet, we have this interpretation. So let me explain, and especially in context of this week's Parsha, which really gives it the power. What does it mean that we're sanctifying God's name? God has sanctity without us. In the language of Chassidus, it's a Kedusha Atzmis. Fundamentally, it's sacred. And yet we bind it with our relationship with Him and our behavior. So you have in the Gemara in Brachos, the famous Gemara, that says there that since Hashem, all the mitzvahs He gives us, He also performs. So it talks about tefillin. So just like we put on tefillin, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is maniach tefillin. He also puts on tefillin. However, there's the question. In our tefillin, it says Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, to remind us of the divine unity. The question is, God doesn't need to be reminded of His divine unity. What does it say in His tefillin? So it says, Mi ka'amchi Yisrael, Goy Echad ba'aretz. Also Echad. But Goy Echad ba'aretz. He needs to be reminded, Kavyachol, so to speak, that there's this one singular nation that He chose in this world that brings, as the Alter Rebbe teaches in Tanya, Achdus Hashem ba'aretz. Goy Echad ba'aretz. Am Echad, Mefuzah Mefedet Bein Ha'amim, V'deseyim Shenis Mekolam. A unity. Now, one can ask the question, what does God have from our bringing unity into this world? Well, this touches, of course, the entire purpose of existence. And this is where Chassidus, especially Chassidus Applied, is so necessary. Because without it, all these ideas remain very difficult either to understand or they remain beyond our scope. But when Chassidus teaches is that really Atzmus, which is the term referred to Atzmus, the Eibishter, is beyond everything. We're beyond existence, beyond the need for existence, beyond needs, period, beyond any type of definition. Mitzvah is built in Mitzvah Nimtza. But nevertheless, Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu Liyos Le'Dira B'Tachtenim. He desired to have a home, a dwelling place in this lowest of worlds. And so we will not understand why, because of a taiv nishtok in kasha, as the Alter Rebbe says, a desire, there's no question. Which really means, to explain what that means, is there's no seichel yet. We're talking about seichel itself, intelligence itself, which includes kashas, questions and answers, wasn't yet created. That itself is part of what he desired, to create a world, al pi seichel. So you can't say that the one that is desiring it is defined by questions and answer. He desires. So desire is the best way, also not complete, but the best way we can understand something that is really meaning that is beyond any scope of explanation. And yet, as Chassidus says, why we don't know, but what we do know. Because we have the result, we have an existence. We have an existence that's not built in Metzias Nimtza, meaning not a non-existential existence, meaning an existence beyond our scope. We have an existence that is made of structure and has intelligence in it. And this existence, God desires some type of relationship with us. And as such, since he wants such a relationship with us, then yes, he binds himself to our revealing and even in initiating divine unity and divine holiness in existence. So these verses are talking about the fundamental themes of, obviously God is beyond everything. But as soon as you say Kedusha, even Kodesh or Podesh, you're already saying that he's connected. Why do you have to say God is holy? What else exists? There's nothing else that exists. Holy refers to this holy, and there's the profane. If you're talking about that which is beyond everything, you don't have to call it holy. So the mere fact you're calling holy, you're already saying what we call Seder Ishtalshlus, that in existence we should be able to reproduce, so to speak, the holiness of the divine. That the divine holiness should be pronounced and be understood, and divine unity, not just Hu Echad, but also Shmei Echad, that also in the level of revelation, the level of conscious experience, we should experience this unity and this holiness. So in that case, yes, Kedushas L'mayla Mikdushas Chem. The Kedusha above is dependent on. And when we sanctify God's name, and thank God today we can do so not in any negative ways, but in positive ways, we are absolutely affecting and fulfilling the divine desire to have a dwelling place and be recognized with its holiness and unity in existence. That even in a profane and a mundane world, we discover the sanctity, the dignity, the majesty of the divine. Now, Chassidus, of course, and the Maimer Tov Shechofei and other Maimorim based on Likutei Torah discuss the details of how this is applied. And in general, there's two ways: Avedis Tzadikim and Avedis Balei Tshuva. Tzadikim do it in a direct way, where they draw down energy into existence. And a Baal Tshuva does it Momata L'mayla by taking existence and beginning from a place where there's a certain disconnect and coming to a connect. So each one has the quality that the other does not have. And this is the theme, both in this Maimer Tov Shel Chafei, and another Maimer the Rebbe said, not Parsha Emor, in Tov Shin Chof Aleph in his room. The Maimer is Kedeshim Tiyu, from last week's Parsha. These are two Maimerim that we have, the Rebbe said, in connection with Yud Gimmel Iyar, in his brother's Yartzeit. Now, if you look in the number of sikhs there are that exist that the Rebbe speaks about his brother, and that's what I want to carry over to, you'll find the common themes. The common themes are about descent and elevation, about tshuva and tzaddikim. Now, I'm not going to speculate, but one can say that Rabbi Yisrael Aryeh Leib, as I mentioned, the Rebbe's youngest brother, much of his life after he left Leningrad, when he came with the Rebbe to the Frierdiker Rebbe, approximately in Tofresh Pei Gimmel, he was born in Tofresh Samach Tes. The Rebbe was born in Tofresh Samach Beis, that means 7 years between them. So Yisrael Aryeh Leib in Tofresh Pei Gimmel would have been 14 years old, Ayin Tes Pei Gimmel, and the Rebbe would have been 21 years old in Pei Gimmel. And after he left, which is approximately, I believe, in Tofresh Tzadik, and he left, he went to Europe and so on, we know that his life took all kinds of strange twists and turns. We don't know many details, but there are people who knew him. And clearly the association with the concept of tshuva and the concept of Yerida and Aliyah, which I'll discuss in a moment from the Rebbe's own words, teach us a lot. And the Rebbe, of course, in his privacy, didn't talk much about Rabbi Yisrael. But we nevertheless have from the Rebbe, and I want to share some ideas which are clearly connected to these parshas as well as the Rebbe connects them. So let's begin from the beginning. I mentioned the two Maimorim, Tavshin Chaf Aleph, Tavshin Chaf Hey. I'll go from the beginning. Of course, he was a stalker. His Ptira was in Tavshin Yud Beis. So after Tavshin Yud Beis, we have the Rebbe spoke on Yud Tes Iyar, which would be the end of Shiva. As we know, the Rebbe kept it a secret from his mother, who was living in New York and didn't want her to know about it. But the Rebbe did sit Shiva, obviously, for his brother. The famous story where the Rebbe would visit his mother every day, and suddenly he can't stop visiting her because she would know then something's wrong. So he said he's going to go visit her anyway, but he was wearing sneakers. So Rabbi Yunik, one of the Rebbe's secretaries, said to the Rebbe, maybe we should paint the sneakers. The Rebbe they were lighter, I'll paint them black, so she shouldn't notice. And the Rebbe's response was, the mama bet is cooking of the feast. She cooked by miraf and ponim. My mother won't look at my feet, she'll look at my face. Which itself has many volumes of messages and lessons. But when the Rebbe stood up from Shiva, he spoke about it, and the Rebbe spoke, as a matter of fact, Lekutei Sichos Chelik Gimmel, volume 3, page 976, footnote 19, says, Mesichas Yud Tes Iyar Tavshin Yud Beis, and a very fascinating point that the Rebbe made. You can clearly see that the Rebbe actually said and wrote this, and now it's also been published in Lekutei Sichos, volume 27, page 363, and you have the general, the things, what the Rebbe actually said then. It's not so clear. What it says is that the Rebbe that says that this is a Mereshimos Hashemim, which means the listeners that listened to it, and the Rebbe added afterwards notes. So you see the notes, you could see that this is a combination of what was heard and also what the Rebbe wrote. But what he writes is fascinating and very illuminating about Rabbi Yisrael Aryeh Leib. So I want to just read briefly the content of it, and then also sum up some of the talks the Rebbe gave in later years where he also referred, and you can see the common theme of sanctifying God, but sanctifying God not in a direct fashion, but through the tshuva manner, meaning from the bottom up. So the Rebbe says, basically, and I'll just you can look it up and read it inside yourself, but I'll just give a quick summation, that the creation in general is a yerid, is a descent and a ishtalshlus from higher to lower. The ishtalshlus I referred to. In other words, the process, the way God created existence, is in a very orderly fashion. The intention that in order that it should afterwards bring an aliyah, an ascent, an aliyah achra aliyah. So in other words, the way the hierarchy of how the existence was brought into being was a descent lower and lower, as Chassidus talks about the descent, the diminishments, the gradations, the levels lower and lower, with the intention that it should be aliyah achar aliyah, elevation after elevation, upwards. And because this was the intention, that's how it actually came out into action. And the Rebbe has footnotes where he discusses this in pretty profound Haskalah fashion, how all this came into being. In a footnote he says, because nothing stops God, and therefore if his intention was this way, that's why it comes out into actuality. Especially because the intention of creation precedes the creation itself. And of course there was no room then for anything that was negative. And therefore you have to say, and this is the Rebbe's words, Shabchira neges, that the choice touches also not only the details, that Bechira, the choice of human beings, whether they will live up to God's plan or not, God forbid, only is around the details. It does not change the sum total of the entire purpose of creation, which is always in a state of ascent. This is quite a chiddush, which is consistent with other places that the Rebbe speaks about it, but he's basically saying that human choices, the descents and ascents, the ups and downs we go through, are regarding the details. But in the big picture, it does not affect the big picture, because that's the intention of God. But any case that the Rebbe adds, and even in more depth, you have to say that also shegam beish prati, that also in an individual is fulfilled the purpose of the Creator. That it's constantly in a state of an ascent, the Maishno, because why would you distinguish between an individual and the general creation? And therefore you have to say, as explained in this piece, you can see clearly he's talking about his brother, that no matter what he went through, is all part of an aliyah. And then the Rebbe continues, and b'chiras ha'adam, human choice, determines mehiras ha'aliyah, the speed and the trajectory, you can say how quickly this aliyah will take place. And you can read, as I said, I'm not going to go through all of this, it could take the entire episode. So this is the summation of one piece of what he said here. The Rebbe brings there as well as different situations, how people face different challenges, and Chassidus explains those challenges and the yeridas that people go through. But the bottom line is that it's all part of an ascent in the big picture. The Rebbe then continues and says, as soon as the descent concludes, begins the elevation. But you don't see it, only in the Neshamas and Gan Eden see it. And of course, when Mashiach comes, we shall all see it. And then he continues on and talks about the different ups and downs that goes through a person's life. And of course also continues about Petira and Avelis of someone passing away, and that is also a process of descent in order to bring to a greater ascent. The bottom line is, you see from this a fascinating reshima, you can say a fascinating manuscript, a fascinating transcript of the Rebbe's ideas that were elicited after the passing of his brother Rabbi Yisrael Aryeh Leib. And with focus on that no matter what a person goes through, ultimately it's all part of this higher elevation. As I said, please read it. I think it's worthwhile reading next Shabbos, especially at Gimmel Iyar, and let's suffice with that. Now, regarding the sikhs, later sikhs that the Rebbe speaks about it, so the Rebbe speaks, there was Shabbos Pasha Acher G'deish Yud Gimmel Iyar Tavshin Mem Hey. That corresponds to the year 1985. And then again in Tavshin Mem Zayin Pesach Sheni, I believe, in the year 1987, Pesach Sheni, the Rebbe also speaks, and there, similar theme actually, where he speaks about the name of Yisrael Aryeh Leib. And briefly, there are differences in the two sikhs, but briefly, especially in the Pesach Sheni sikh, he talks about the descent, the order of the soul's descent below starts with Yisrael as a high level. Kisarisa Lekim Vanoshim Vatuchel, referring to the battle that the soul will encounter as it enters below. And then Aryeh, which is the lion, is his Gaber Kari. He should be Gibber Kari, strong and iron, is dealing with the battle with L'umazeh and the difficulties and the concealments that exist in this world. And Leib, Aryeh Leib, is the jargon, or the translation in Yiddish, which brings it even further down, because Yiddish brings down the ideas in Hebrew even more into this material world. So the names of Yisrael Aryeh Leib refer to the concept of transforming the lowest levels, and that's the advantage of tshuva. That's one idea. In the other Farbrengen, in Achrei G'deishim, the Rebbe also connected to the two chapters Achrei G'deishim. Achrei is Tzadikim. It's talking about Nodav and Avihu, how the idea of bringing Elikus and divine down below, not the way by them it was Klei Nefesh, and they passed away through the Eish Zora, through their great love and ecstasy. And Kedeshim refers to Kedushasin L'mayla M'Kedushas Chem, which refers to the power of Baal Tshuva, the Aveda of Bligvul, as the Rebbe explains there. And Yisrael is the Aveda of Tzadikim, and Aryeh Leib is the Aveda of Balei Tshuva. The Rebbe brings in that sikha as well a very fascinating thing, that you can find an example of this in the laws of Hilchos Talmud Torah. The Alter Rebbe says that when a person studies Torah, even if he's studying Shalei Lishma, which means it could be for not positive intentions, you still encourage him to study, because the Moyer Sheba, the Moyer, the luminary within Torah, will ultimately bring him back La'yidach Memen Nidach to do tshuva. The Rebbe asked the question, but meanwhile, he's taking the Torah and is bringing it down to the lowest levels. And nevertheless, because it's Yisrael, afal pishachota Yisrael. So even when a Jew is in that state, the truth is his essence is not there. He's still Yisrael. And therefore, and therefore he's able to even learn Torah with Teich Shalei Lishma Ba Lishma. Because the whole purpose, even of his descent, is to bring to the ascent. Very similar to the words that Rebbe said in Tavshin Yud Beis. But then he goes even further. He says in the footnote there, in the Hagah, and the Alter Rebbe's Kuntres Achim there, in Hilchos Talmud Torah, he says, but that's regarding the person himself who's studying Torah. A teacher does not have to put himself in that position because of a doubt that a student is in a difficult situation. He doesn't have to get involved in that. Why? Because tzaddikim is aved of tzaddik. Yisrael is Yisrael, and Arya Leib is Arya Leib. Yisrael remains in Kedusha. Arya Leib, the student is allowed, goes there because B'teich Shalei Lishma he'll ultimately come to a higher place. You could see he's alluding to the Rebbe, to Yisrael, the Rebbe's brother's challenges. And of course he was a student of Rab Levi, because the Rebbe was, and of Frierdiker Rebbe, and of Chassidus. But then the Rebbe adds, the Alter Rebbe continues, V'yesh leimer, also the teacher has to put in place himself in a suffix. Even though the student is in that place, the teacher also has to go there. And the Rebbe gives an example of Moshe Rabbeinu, that he's buried outside of Eretz Yisrael, because to give the strength to bring all the Eden back to Eretz Yisrael when Mashiach will come. So the bottom line is that even the Rav has to also put himself in that place. And you can learn much into this of the Rebbe's attitude and between the lines of taking Rabbi Yisrael Arya Leib's life and elevating it and understanding its deeper purpose. Obviously, I don't want to read into things that as I said earlier, speculation, but I think much can be derived from these ideas, including the challenges that the Rebbe's brother went through. I want to add one more thing. In Tavshin Lamed Hey, Yud Shvat, Professor Rosenblum, a mathematician, was by the Fabrengen, and the Rebbe, he went over to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe spoke to him. Today we have the words the Rebbe speaks to him, asking him that I hope that the documents I've sent you sent him a manuscript, a mathematical manuscript. I hope you publish them. And I don't want to tell you, the Rebbe says, who wrote them, because I don't want to pressure you. But then the Rebbe suddenly does tell him. Because Dr. Professor Rosenblum was reluctant, says, I'll give it to someone else, I'll have someone research it. But the Rebbe said, I want you to do it. And then he says, this is from my brother. It's the only thing we have from him that he wrote, mathematics. So Professor Rosenblum, of course, it says, I'll do anything for this. And the Rebbe said, I'll pay for it, and all the details, I'll make sure everything is taken care of. Professor Rosenblum then asked the Rebbe, does it have sources? When he wrote these formulas, does it have sources? So he said, my brother's style was that he would write an idea, and later he would maybe look for sources, but he wrote an idea without looking at sources. And then the Rebbe suddenly expresses himself in English. He says he was very zealous about his independence. Very zealous about his independence, which, again, is one of the few times you hear the Rebbe express. Now, of course, independence, we know the Rebbe, the zealousness of independence, but independence, interestingly, has, of course, two sides to it. Independence means you can do anything, but independence also is the type of revolutionary, a person who has the ability to go out of the box and think in ways without conforming to anyone else out, independence, and zealous about his independence. I wanted to throw that out as well. Of course, we can learn many lessons from that, because it means that we do not have to stay in a particular box, in a narrow place, and we have to use, and of course in Kedusha, our skills to go beyond limits and beyond any type of situation. Asovet tzaddikai b'tiyufta, it says, when Mashiach comes and tzaddikim will do tshuva. Tshuva there doesn't mean alached, God forbid, on a sin. Tshuva means that they'll go outside of the structure of a tzaddik, and they will have the bligvul, the infinite possibilities that about tshuva teaches us all to do. So there are many lessons we can learn from Yisrael Leib, and the Rebbe says there specifically, even though as an individual, we learn from him. Of course, being the Rebbe's brother, these lessons are directly connected to us, and put it in psychological terminology, a bit in Chassidus Applied terminology, and that is that no matter what we go through, it's all part of a bigger journey. Now, obviously, we have the choice, and the Rebbe mentions there, a person will be judged for his choices, and we have the choice to speed up the process or not. However, no matter what happens, when we look back, we have to remember it's all part of a bigger plan and a bigger aliyah. So there's nothing in life that should bring us down. Anything should be a catalyst to grow further and to bring more light and more illumination and reveal more of our potential in this world. Okay, Let us move now into a question. How can a perfect life be meaningful? Maybe this is a good segue, actually. And the questioner writes the following. I'm a very blessed person, and thank God, have many reasons to be happy and optimistic. I've come to realize, though, that I'm afraid of happiness. Whenever I'm feeling content or experiencing an idyllic moment, the intense happiness makes me panic. I can't help my mind from wandering to places of, is this too good to be true, or something is going to go wrong? Even when I can stop my mind from going there, the intensity of the happiness makes me want to hide from it. I've been conditioned to find purpose and meaning in the struggles of life, and therefore tread cautiously around tranquility. My uneasiness about happiness extends to my anticipation of Mashiach as well, because I don't understand how a perfect life can be meaningful. How can I learn to appreciate the serene moments in life? And how can I understand that a perfect life, Mashiach, can indeed be meaningful? Well, being I don't know the individual who wrote this, but I'll say the following to you and to everyone who's listening to this. The words "I'm afraid of happiness" can be interpreted several ways, and I hope it's not in the negative way, and it's only the idea that you've been trained to think in terms of effort, and a person has to always not be satisfied with where they are, and they have to always feel restless to grow. But unfortunately, there are people who are afraid of happiness because they did not live in a happy life, and happiness was always seen as some type of anomaly or even an aberration. There are people who expect always the worst, and when something is going too peaceful, they sometimes even create instability because that's what they're used to. This is unfortunately one of the symptoms of dysfunctional lives in homes that were very unstable and unpredictable. People growing up today, they become addicted to toxicity, and when they don't find chaos in their lives, often create chaos. So I hope this doesn't at all. I just wanted to qualify that that's discussed, a whole other discussion of its own, and unfortunately, people who growing up in an unhealthy environment think that's the state. Happiness is the natural state we should always be in. Children are naturally happy. And unhappiness is an aberration. So therefore, if anyone's experiencing that, they have a difficulty with happiness because of that, they need to be exposed and learn that happiness is the way to be, and that's the natural state. But let me address this from the other angle. Let's assume that's not the case, that we're dealing here with someone's difficulty with happiness because they've been trained to think that everything has to come with effort, and something's wrong if it's not coming with an effort and with some exertion and so on. So let's put it in this context. There are really two. When a person is restless, there are two ways that a person can be restless. Is restlessness a good thing or a bad thing? Let's put it that way. So many will say it's not a good thing. A person should have peace, menuchas hanefesh, menuchas haguf, peace of mind, peace of heart, tranquility, serenity, as you put it. And restlessness seems to be a form of angst, and even that leads to anxiety. So let me discuss that there are actually two types of restlessness, one a healthy sort and one an unhealthy sort. The unhealthy sort is a restlessness which a person is simply never satisfied, and let me correct myself, they're not satisfied. They're constantly not content, and they don't have that ability to just be at peace. And therefore, they're always in an anxious state. That's an unhealthy form of restlessness. Then there's a healthy form of restlessness, which Chazal call, and we find this at the end of some of the Masechtas, Talmidei Chachamim, Tzadikim, Ein Lehem Menucha, Lo Be'elam Hazeh, V'Lo Be'elam Haba. Sometimes Talmidei scholars or Tzadikim righteous do not have peace, Menucha, not in this world and not in the world to come. Now, most you read that, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's seen as a quality. As a matter of fact, al pasuk shenamar yelchu machayil al chayil, yirol elikim b'tzion. So, how do you explain that in the context of one second? Isn't menucha a blessing? Ein la menucha. So, there's actually a contradiction in Talmid the Masechta Talmid at the end. It says yem shekulei Shabbos or menucha l'chayil omim. Mashiach is the Tkufis, the 6,000 years, like correspond to the 6 days of the week. Comes Shabbos in the 7th millennium, Yom Shekulei Shabbos u'Menucha l'Chayil Omim. A day that will be complete peace. The word Menucha is Kulei Shabbos u'Menucha, and here Ein la Menucha Lo Be'elam Hazeh V'Lo Be'elam Haba. Also Elam Haba, which can refer to Gan Eden, but also refers to Lasad Lavi, the future. So one of the explanations, I believe the Mashal hints to it, and I've definitely heard it from the Rebbe, is that how do you reconcile ein la menucha and menucha yom shekul Shabbos and menucha, that they will be at peace with not having peace? Because we're talking about healthy restlessness, the restlessness of a flickering soul, of Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam, of a soul that does not just sit on one spot. It's always moving, mobile. That's a healthy restlessness. It's a restlessness that is always seeking to grow, always seeking to connect to God more. No matter how much you connect, even Mashiach, since it's Ein Sof, there's no limit. Tzemach Tzedek famous story where the Alter Rebbe wanted to give him a gift of Torah. This year is the 150th Yartzeit of the Tzemach Tzedek, so worthwhile mentioning. And he refused the gift. What was the gift? A certain amount of Yediyah knowledge in Torah. Why did he refuse it? Because you gaita metzasi. You need to struggle. You need to place effort on it. And later he regretted it. Why? Because Torah is Ein Sof. It's an infinite journey. So whatever he would have received of a gift would have always been there be more. The Rebbe refers to a number of times that in today's day and age, we have encyclopedias, we have many shortcuts in learning Torah. On the contrary, the Rebbe says that it's a blessing. Why? Not that it takes away from our effort, it takes away from the basic effort of searching for something, you have it all in front of you and so on. And now you can use the time and effort to grow in learning Torah even further. So that in that context, that's a healthy restlessness. Ein la menucha, so they're at peace with not being at peace. Most of us see lack of peace as being, I'd love to have the end story. I could be lying on a beach, relaxing, no worries. That's not healthy peace. That is animal bliss. That's losing a person's sense of restlessness to grow and to spiritually always grow. The Rebbe spoke so strongly when he turned 70 against retirement. And a number of times after that, in the Mem, Aleph, Mem Beis, when he started speaking to Feres Kenim Levi Yitzchak, what do you mean retirement? God gave you life. Life is mobility. How you experience life changes in the different periods of our lifetimes. But we're constantly on a journey. So that journey is a healthy journey, and yes, it should not create an element of total peace where you're not interested in moving or growing. On the other hand, Menuchas HaNefesh is a blessing in context of unhealthy restlessness, where a person is never able to find peace of mind and heart because they feel inadequate, or they feel criticized, or they feel that there's always missing something. That's a very different type of restlessness. So they both can be called the name restlessness, but they're very different. One is demoralizing and weakening. One leads to anxiety and maybe worse. The other is motivating, growthful, leading you to grow to greater places. Sameach bechelke, Ezu Asher is a Sameach bechelke, but it says a Sameach bechelke, who's the wealthy one? The one that is satisfied with his lot. That's in Gashmis, but not Ruchnis. In physical things, yes, you have to be satisfied with what you have and not keep on looking over your shoulder or unable to function because you always want more, you're always jealous of others and so on. But in Ruchnis, a person should always have that need to grow and aspire. Now, in that context, the idea of happiness in being happy without doing anything is obviously not a positive thing. So I hope I addressed it from both angles, and I'll add finally, when Mashiach comes, people wonder, it says in Yem, other places, that midbenkin we will yearn for the days when we struggled. So it's very clear, Nageres HaKedah, Simach Chavav, the Alter Rebbe says at the end there, we will also struggle when Mashiach comes, but the struggle will not be between evil and good, between bad and good, but it will be between holiness and higher levels of holiness. Aliyas and Kedusha itself. Now, of course, it's easier when you have a bad habit, get rid of a bad habit to get to a good habit. It's a struggle, but it's understandable. To get from good to better, to even better, to excellent, to beyond excellent, and on, can be harder to achieve because once you're in a good place, what do I need to grow from there? But that's exactly what Mashiach's times are about, that there'll be a growth in that itself. Today, the growth is from the dark to the light. In light itself, that will be in the future. So Ein la menucha, there'll be constant restlessness of that sort, but that's a very healthy restlessness. So we should all be blessed only with a healthy form of angst, that we always aspire to something more. The soul looks upward and is always looking to grow in every possible way in holiness and kedusha, mailim b'kedush. Next question: interacting with missionaries, completely unrelated. I was recently visited by J witnesses. They came to my door to give me some literature and direct me to their website for more information. They engaged me in conversation about the future of civilization and other religious ideas. They wanted to share their ideas and hear mine. Our conversation was polite and short-lived, but I closed the door frustrated at myself for not being more assertive. Should I not have taken their pamphlet, even though I intended to trash it afterward? Was I supposed to be less polite and debunk their statements? Can you give me some advice on how to deal with this more confidently in the future? Second questioner, similar topic. Not too long ago, while doing Mivtzoyim, I noticed the Jews for J booth. At the time, I decided that the best thing to do was to ignore them and continue helping Jews put on tefillin. But after that incident, I wondered if there was something else I should have done. In another situation, I was approached by a Christian man who was interested in learning about Yiddishkeit as an intellectual pursuit. After a while, it became clear that his interest really lay in convincing me to join his bandwagon. I stopped interacting with him at that point because all my arguments fell on deaf ears, as he had one goal in mind, to bait me with Christian beliefs. On one hand, I'm confident that I did the right thing by stopping all communication with him. On the other hand, I'm uneasy. Maybe as a result of me not answering him completely, he'll come to the conclusion that he understands the Bible more than an observant Jew. Also, when it comes to our brothers and sisters that find themselves seduced into Jews for J, I feel like I'm doing harm by not knowing how to approach their specific situation. I know of one interaction where the Rebbe spoke about how the issue of missionaries is something that even Reform and other groups could join together with observant Jews to battle against. In my years in yeshiva, the issue of missionaries was never thoroughly discussed. Are you familiar with any sources in which the Rebbe discusses the proper approach to missionaries and Jews for J? What would your advice be in confronting them? Okay. Yeah. Well, let's begin with this. We do not engage in any form of debates or confrontations. It's not in our interest. We're not proselytizers. We're not trying to convince anyone of anything. At the same time, da masha toshiv, you need to know inside of you, every one of us, what to answer. But it says da masha toshiv. And then it says in the Pasuk in Mishlei, altan la'ovel ba'avlosei. Do not answer someone because you may become hamisavik imanuvel misnavel kamaisei. Not to engage. But it says da masha toshiv because the answer is da masha toshiv. Doesn't mean you always have to answer. You need to know. You need to be confident and never feel in any way defensive. But to engage in debate is, in almost all cases, not the way to go because it won't do anything anyway. Even if you have the best arguments. A debate is already a type of, I don't say endorsement, but giving credibility and some recognition of another approach. There were people like Professor Dr. Rabbi Emanuel Shachad that the Rebbe gave because he had that ability. And the Rebbe, knowing him, knew that it would not get influenced. And he did debate, but that's an exception and not suggest that to anyone because, again, debates offer more entertainment than they are actual results. And it confuses people who don't know much. They hear two sides, even though they may understand, may not understand. You could have all the best arguments, but they could be presented in a way that people don't like you because you're presented too aggressively. Debate is not an approach we take at all. However, at the same time, if someone knocks on your door, let's start with the first questioner, and engages you, I think you have to turn everything from defense to offense. 7 billion people on this planet. The Eibishter gave us a Torah. The Rambam paskins in the end of chapter 8 of Hilchos Malachim. And the Rebbe makes it clear that this is something we could and must do today. In the Mems, there's all the sichas to influence people in the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Neach, which are really, people dismiss the Sheva Mitzvahs as if there's some type of 7 addendums. They happen to be the foundations of civilization, and most of the 10 commandments are the Sheva Mitzvahs in different form, except honoring your parents and Shabbos. If every Jew kept the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Neach as an aside, Mashiach would be here already. So we have an obligation to do this, and not only to do it not only to inspire, but also to say that it comes from Sinai. So I would direct, if you're going to have a conversation, I would direct it toward that, and that's it. No debate, no discussion. You could say, you could be nice and cordial and say basically, I'm glad you came here, but I would like to share with you that that the Torah tells us that God gave us the Torah and gave us a code of law, a moral code given to Noah and to Abraham, embraced by all the people of the world, and I just like to encourage you to study about it, to act on it, and so on. Now they may say, that's what I'm doing already, and so on. Fine, they're doing it, so then give them a blessing to do it more, and you send them on their way. You don't have to become, and cordiality doesn't necessarily mean you have to give them the time of day to speak equal time. Obviously, you have to be respectful. Now, this is if you choose. If you choose not to speak to them, I would suggest yes to speak, but be informed of what to say, and beyond the offensive. Offense is the best defense. So that's the key thing, is to have the language, what to say to anyone that comes your way, whether they are involved with other things or not. But debates and engaging on their terms, absolutely not. And that's completely unacceptable. As far as the second questioner asks about Mivtzoyim and so on, yes, we generally ignore. If you see people like that reaching out to Jews, which is always possible, so obviously if you can do something by speaking to the Jews, great, but I don't know if you're going to help anything if you're going to go over to that booth and try to do what? Close them down? Argue with them? The argument will not go anywhere. Now, if a Jew comes your way, and he's coming to your Shabbos table, or you meet him, and he has all kinds of arguments he's heard from missionaries, obviously, just like in any case, out of love, compassion to our fellow Jews, you want to inform that person as much as possible and give them something to read, but never engage in debates. Debates never go anywhere. And even if you win one argument, then comes another argument. The key is to, with love, with information, with being on the offense, giving people the approach to life, which Judaism gives us, and then what do we need anything else? Why do we need other to tell us? We came before everybody. The Jewish people came before the Christians, before the Muslims. Why can't we look into our own sources? And that's the best preemptive medicine. As I said, and generally not to engage in any particular way. Now, if you see missionaries who are proselytizing and it's dangerous, so there are places to call. There are in community like the Rabbi J.J. Hecht established, the anti-Shmad, NCFJE can call them, Rabbi Hecht, and ask them what would they suggest, maybe alert them. That's already dealing with situations where you see they're going to Brighton Beach or other places where you find them trying to pick on and trying to brainwash some impressionable and ignorant Jews. But I would not directly engage directly with them unless you're really equipped to do so. It's, as I said, not the direction to take. Above all, it's a challenge that needs to be rise to the occasion by digging deeper and understanding Yiddishkeit better and presenting it in a way that preempts any need for anything else. That's the underlying point. If you need more language and speak, I think you have to read about it. If you have more questions following up, please send them in and I'll try to address it further. Okay. Next. Okay. Dealing with past, best forgotten relationships. I'm a Baal Tshuva who lived an unobservant life for more than 30 years. I was raised Reform and therefore led a life very far from authentic Judaism. My previous lifestyle is still alive in my memory and sometimes fills my mind at unwanted times. This issue is especially relevant during davening. What tools can help me put memories of past relationships that would be best forgotten behind me? In general, what is there to do about my past creeping into my present? Well, in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, whether it's the past or in general, we all have thoughts that can creep in at any given time. So there's a general attitude of how one avoids or ignores and also understands that that's part of the tachbulas, part of the strategies of the Yetzer Hara that wants to throw thoughts like that in. So whether it's a past relationship or a current thought that doesn't belong there when you're davening or doing something else of holiness, that's the approach to it. I'll talk about the past in a moment, which is the specific question. So we all deal with this, and we have to remember not to get overwhelmed by the fact that we will have thoughts. That's part of life. We live in a world where there are many distractions, to put it mildly. There are many forces that seduce us. And yes, we have our past experiences as well. And they will come and creep in and haunt us in different times. The key to understand, as Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, in a number of places, is this all part of the challenge and the purpose of life. The purpose of life is that we have the choice, so b'charta b'chaim, to choose to live positively and to focus on looking ahead, focus on what am I doing with my faculties, how am I living up to my great potential. When someone's, for example, busy at work, they're driven to make a profit, or they're driven to make a sale, or they're driven to build a new department. You'll see when someone's passionately involved in building something, generally speaking, negative thoughts become weaker. Now, every person, let's take a business, may have thoughts. Can I really build this business? There's all kinds of competition. I may not succeed. I may run out of money. What do leaders do? What do people who think ahead do? They say to themselves, listen, there are challenges. I'll anticipate them, But the key is to forge ahead. You cannot allow every detractor and every type of distraction and not allow you to forge ahead. I'm talking pure on a business level. The same thing is in Kedusha and Yiddishkeit. When we're involved with offensive measures, I keep talking about offense being the best defense, and we're driven to succeed, to teach, to innovate, to learn something. You learn Chassidus, you learn Teda, and it excites you. That's the best way to fight negative stuff in general. Now, as far as past relationships, we know that tshuva erases the past. Your memory may still have a memory. We talk about the Japanese soldier who was found in 1963, almost 20 years after World War II, on some Pacific island, and he thought the war was still on because he didn't hear from the emperor that the war was over. And he had a rusty rifle, but he still thought there was a war. Very often our pasts are like that. They haunt us because they're old patterns, they're old habits. But the Torah tells us, tshuva has the ability to go back in time and rewire your engineering. Or re-engineer your wiring, either way. To change the wiring in a way. So there's as tshuva ma'ava, there's tshuva miyira, mekana lahaba, either from here on, or you actually change zdenus nasla zachias. Why? Because you have the ability to take a liability and turn it to an asset. You have the ability to take something and rechannel it. If you have a test in the or tests in that direction, something you have to work on. But there's no such thing that you are a victim of the past. The past can be erased. The Jews built an egel, Azov. Doesn't get worse than that. An idol. And very deliberately. It wasn't an accident. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu was able to elicit Yom Kippur. Tshuva. Yom Tshuva Lakel. A day of tshuva, that we could erase the past. Now, so when a thought comes up, you have to say it to yourself very simple. This is a thought. It's part of my memory banks. It comes up. Okay. Something you try to find the ways to push away. But don't let it become a force where, my whole past is haunting me and so on. That's the general approach. Now, if it's a past that you cannot get out of your memories, and they really do weaken and debilitate you, that may require talking to someone. A person is concerned or anxious, you speak yasiach, which is one way to actually distract ourselves, as the Rebbe Marash explains the reconciliation of those two interpretations. Yasiach from the word speaking, yasiach from the word heschadas, which is to distract yourself. So there are methods. But overall, for number one, don't get so excited about it. This happens to everybody. We all have our negative thoughts. Number two, focus on positive. You're davening. Think of how you're going to use God's gift to you, life, and your skills and abilities to work forward. And that usually will weaken the negative that comes from the past. And above all, to remember, we are new human beings, which of course says about Iyar by Matan Torah, through conversion, but the same is true with tshuva, that it does give us a new reality, a new paradigm, and a new modality from which to forge ahead. Okay. Now there are a few questions that were from previous episodes. Let's see if we can cover a few, each week trying to deal with some of them. And then we'll deal with the Chassidus question and the essays. Let me deal with women as breadwinners feedback from previous episodes. Clearly it touched a nerve, and a number of people wrote to us about it. So I'll talk about that. There's other topics as well. I'll see how much we can cover here with the time allowed. So, feedback on women as breadwinners. The initial question was, is the traditional role of the man is to be the breadwinner? What are circumstances where the woman is to rise to the occasion, and all the details around that, which were discussed in last episode. Actually, 2 episodes back in 113 and 112 as well, I believe. So, comment, someone writes, thank you for addressing the important issue of women as breadwinners. In our day and age, especially where I live in Israel, it would be almost impossible for a family to survive if both husband and wife didn't work. My husband has a good job, Baruch Hashem, but if I didn't work full time, there would be no way that we could pay the bills. From life is expensive. By no means do we live a lavish lifestyle, yet we would be living in poverty if we both didn't work. I just thought that this aspect should be mentioned. Thank you for your inspiring broadcasts. Okay. Next comment or question. I listened to your response about the woman who was concerned about her husband not making a living, and the responsibility of earning a livelihood fell on her. In general, I think you are right on target, but I do think it should be mentioned specifically that today's generation, we're supporting a family is not easy at all, and it goes without saying that the bigger the family, the more difficult it can get. It is certainly important for a woman to understand that if her husband is doing what he can, it is more than normal and expected of her to chip in and try to help out. It may not be her obligation, but sensitivity and understanding of the situation goes a long way. I'm saying this because I know of quite a few women who just shift responsibility being that it is the husband's obligation. The fact that he is working himself to the bone means almost nothing to them, and that is very insensitive and damaging to the relationship and the home. In general, did the Rebbe ever guide women to finding jobs in order to earn a livelihood, or was it always about education and outreach? And can it be sometimes that the wife is just more capable than the husband and should therefore take that into consideration as well? Very often these ideas, this is my response, is about case by case. In generally speaking, we have actually notes from the Rebbe, and I'll read one in the coming weeks, I don't have it in front of me right now, about the role of a woman in a keres habayis in the home. At the same time, we know the Rebbe encouraged women to be active in the community and partners with their husbands, especially shluchim and shluchis, in influencing and inspiring. And of course, in our day and age, yes, sometimes it's necessary. So I don't have a blanket answer to say in every given situation. You know, you also have situations where women are with their children, many children, and is it fair to also ask them to work? You can't just say, the husband may be working to the bone, but so is the woman at home and with her family. So to make a blanket statement that this is the way it has to be, I think it has to be done case by case and sensitively based on the situation. Also based on the temperament and the mindset and the emotional capacity of both man and woman. I think in a marriage, it's about a partnership. And a partnership means you have to look at both partners, they have to talk to each other, they need help from a third party to get some objective advice, by all means, aseh l'charav, and really see we're partners. How do we do this? And I think if you get egos out of the way, and any past resentments, or bad blood, or even personality clashes, and each one really is focusing on the positive of what they're capable of doing, then you have a healthy partnership. That's a general statement. And in most cases, if it's with that foundation in place, you can work most things out. God will bless and people will make it easier as far as finances and as far as income goes. However, this is the approach no matter what situation it is. And then in that specifics, there are specifics of how to do this. These are very difficult questions to answer with much detail because every situation is different. So I'm trying to stick to general guidelines without getting over specific because I don't want anyone using what I said and it's happened in the past. Rabbi Jacobson said so and it goes back to their husband or to the wife, you hear. So rather than do that, let's just use the general principles and then most importantly to get the conversation going, what is best under the circumstances. And this again has to do very much to people's individual situation. Okay, another question in this regard. I have 4 beautiful young children, Baruch Hashem, living in a small community with no family support. My husband, Baruch Hashem, has no physical handicaps, but unfortunately I'm in a very similar situation as the woman who posed her question last week. Perhaps, maybe worse, because my father is not well off and can't give us any financial relief. I can totally relate to her frustration, pain, stress, and the wanting to end it all. After trying for years to kindly suggest to my husband to take up a new form of earning a living and triggering abusive behaviors in him, I find myself at a loss for ideas. I also feel that by swallowing the abuse and by slaving away to put food on the table, we are enabling our husbands to continue being dysfunctional. What you mentioned, Rabbi Jacobson, is all true if we were dealing with completely healthy people. However, how are these husbands supposed to understand or listen if they are totally cut off from reality and refuse to hear their own wives' pleas? My question is, if it's obviously that our husbands have anger issues and abusive tendencies, and if our words fall on deaf ears anyway, how are we meant to bring about any change? Secondly, it is true that the more we continue to support our family, the more we are enabling our husbands. However, if we want our children to be fed and clothed and healthy, what other alternative is there than to continue providing? Please, Rabbi Jacobson, can you provide more concrete advice? I must repeat that there is an element of case by case, even as I just said. As much as my heart goes out, and I'd love to be able to give you a specific answer, I don't know the circumstances. I don't know the husband, I don't know what he's capable of hearing, or is he capable. It comes down to this. If you're dealing with a situation, let's go with the extreme, a husband or a spouse, for that matter a wife, that's just not capable of hearing. And you need to confirm this objectively, because many of us are in that situation, and we're convinced that the other person is not listening, and maybe you're not listening. So we need to also confirm this. I've seen very often people say that my husband, my spouse, simply doesn't know, has deaf ears. And then when you sit down to talk about it, you really see it's a little more complicated than that. But let's say we can establish that case, then we have to look. If that indeed is the case, we have to find ways. The question is, maybe you need an ultimatum. Maybe you need a rov. Maybe you need a mashpia. Now, there are people, spouses, that refuse to go, and unfortunately, sometimes we have to swallow it until it comes to hitting rock bottom. I don't want to say rock bottom, but it's hitting the situation where you must do something. Listen, none of us want to disrupt our families, our marriages. We don't want to rock the boat. It's understandable. But there comes a point where you have to weigh the two. And this will need usually objective advice. A mashpia that can help determine that. Because there are situations where I've seen that you become an enabler, a codependent, however you want to put it, by allowing the spouse to continue doing things that are abusive or not responsible. But everything is, you have to know what extent. It doesn't mean this every situation is intolerable. This needs to be weighed. You need to see the effect it has on the family and children. You have to need to see yourself. Some women or some spouses are able to absorb more. That doesn't always mean you should absorb more, but some are more capable, some are not. That's why it's extremely difficult to give, again, specific advice. But I will tell you this, if anyone reaches out to me, and you can give me more details, I pledge that I will attempt to give some advice or direct you to some people that you can speak to. Don't sit and suffer in silence. Reach out. Find someone to speak to. You can never imagine. Can't imagine the power of sometimes just getting it off your chest, venting, being able to communicate. Obviously, getting good advice as well. So don't hesitate to do so, and about this topic or any other topics. Okay. So we covered that. There are more topics, feedback. I must say, questions keep coming in. Can't keep up with all of them. Trying our best to keep. There were some questions that were a little more intricate. I just want to acknowledge them. People have written about the Erev, and you hear all online all the arguments about it. So I don't know how much more I can add. I will add once I see what the rabbis and others say about it, and get some more clarity what the Rebbe says. Also, questions have been asked to me about the Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom HaShoah, Yom Yerushalayim, which I will address from the Rebbe's perspective. I just wanted to acknowledge, because a number of questions have come in. I'm not ignoring them. As you know, that I try to address everything, even questions that are taboo and complicated, to the best of my ability with the sources that I'm able to find. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. With that, let us go over to the Chassidus question of the week, which is a very profound question and a profound topic, but always very geschmack and enjoyable to speak about. Here's the Chassidus question. A short question, but requires a more than short answer. Can you please explain the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe with the use of the idea of Iyar, as Iyar Ein Sof, light, or energy, as described in the Maimer Vayelech in Hemshech Samach Vav, top of page 169. V'zeu ma shechidush Rabbeinu nishmas Eden, the Iyar nikre Ein Sof mipnei shehu me'ein hamoyer. Okay. So let's, nice as Sefer V'nechza, let's take the Sefer Samach Vav and open it up. So Vayelech Samach Vav, those that are familiar know, is perhaps one of the most fundamental discourses ever delivered. And it's part of the Hemshech Samach Vav, which is as you know, in the Rebbe Rashab, two fundamental Hemshechim, Samach Vav and Ayin Beis. Samach Vav, which began delivered Rosh Hashanah 1906, or 1905, I should correct myself, consisting of 61 discourses, and went into till Tafresh Samach Ches 1908. And in it there's a Maimer Vayelech, that the Pasha, Shabbos Pasha B'Shala, Vayelech Hashem El Esayam, and which is, of course, in part of the context of the flow of Amshechai and Samach Vav, discusses and says exactly that line. Chiddush Rabbeinu Nishmas Eden B'inyan Ha'er, as I just quoted. And the questioner is asking, what is the Chiddush? Now, before we get into the actual Chiddush, let me just share that today, because we have all the discourses, most of them from the previous Rabbeim, we also know that many of these discourses are based on previous ones, and actually sometimes even the language. This Maimer happens to be a discourse from the Tzemach Tzedek in a Maimer that begins Dibra Maskul Lahavin Inyan Eira Ein Sof, and it's printed today in Eira Teira in Yonim, page 175 and on. I actually sat when I was studying this a few years ago and compared the two and marked up exactly the Tzemach Tzedek's Lashon and how the Rebbe Rashab adds to it. And interesting, this piece, there's a Rebbe Rashab's edition. You don't see the words Chiddush Rabbeinu Shmeseiden, even though content-wise you could see the similar idea. And Eira Teira there on page 176, 177, you see that the kernel of the idea that the Rebbe Rashab develops is there. I just want to say that for the record because it helps sometimes understand the ideas when you see the evolution of how they develop from that. Now, if you read this discourse in depth, you realize it's a complicated Maimer, and I'll just sum up the context of this. So when the Alter Rebbe Rashab says Chiddush Rabbeinu Shmeseiden, let me just read a few words afterwards. So he says, he brings a disagreement between the Mekubalim Rishenim. Mekubalim Rishenim mean the classic, the original, the early Kabbalists. Now Mekubalim Rishenim usually refers to the Kabbalists before the Arizal. And the Kabbalim Achreinim would be the Arizal and on. And Kabbalim Rishenim, in this case, he's bringing Ramak and Rameh. Ramak is Ramoshe Kardaviro, and the Rameh Mipano, who wrote a commentary on the Ramak. And he says, the opinion of the Kabbalim Rishenim, in this case could be also others that go back to the 11th century and so on, Ginas Agus and others, is that Shmoi hu arotzen hu ein sof, mitzad atzmei. That when you say Hoyahu Shmoi Bolvad, God's name is referring to God's will, and that will is an element of Ein Sof in it, is an element of divine infinity, divine, you can say, omnipotence even. Obviously not on its own, because God invested in his desire, in his rotzen. The will of God is not God himself, it's the will of God, the desire of God, but that will is infused with that divine omnipotence. But there's a problem with that, because we usually say omnipotence is only Atzmus itself. On the other hand, there are opinions, therefore, that say that Rotzen is not, that only Atzmus is Ein Sof. And everything else is already not Ein Sof in the sense, we're not talking about, by the way, Ein Sof meaning infinite. You can have infinite set of numbers. We're talking about infinite in the omnipotent element, which is reserved only for Atzmus. So there's a disagreement between Mekubalim. A similar disagreement is what he brings earlier in the discourse, is that the Ramak says, Ima Keser hu Ein Sof. He has an entire section in Pardes. Pardes means orchard, but it's the book, the classic work, among others, but the classic magnum opus of the Ramak, Ramesha Kardaviro, lived in Sfat, was a little older than Arizal, and himself produced tremendous amount, but then he became a student of the Arizals. And there's which is another discussion of its own. But there's Kabbalah Ramak, Kabbalah Arizal. And the Ramak brings in this, and essentially the Ramak really codified, almost like a Rambam of Kabbalah, codified, and he brings the disagreement, Im Keser, which is Ratzon, is Ein Sof or not. And these are the two opinions. Is it Ein Sof, then it has the problem, how could anything but Atzmus, God himself, be Ein Sof? If it's not, then what connection do we have to Ein Sof? That's the discussion. So here's where then he goes on. V'Rabbeinu Chiddush, this is the Rebbe Rashab writing now. The Shmoi hu Iyar. Shmoi is not Rotzen, it's Iyar. V'hu Ein Sof loy mitzad atzmei ki mitzad hamoyer. Dahainu shu me'ein hamoyer. And he goes on to explain that Iyar has in it an element that's Kodem Kikadmusei. That's the real element. Kodem Kikadmusei means it's as what can I say? As I'm trying to find the word for Kodem. Kodem means Kadmin, meaning before anything else. So anything besides Atzmus, of course, follows Atzmus, even the highest levels. But Eir Ein Sof, because it's Me'ein HaMoyer, and it's completely encompassed in the source, it has an element of God's so-called Kadmus, God's originality, God being the source of everything. So what's the Chiddush? The Chiddush is that you have something that's not Atzmus, but it's also not Atzmus. And that's the Chiddush of Eir. So let's explain. It's not just words, Rotzen Eir. Rotzen is an entity. It's a defined entity, someone's desire. To say, for example, a human being is his desire, it's not correct. Because we exist even without a desire. You can have a rotzen to do one thing, a desire to do one thing, a rotzen to do something else. That means it's already a level, step below you. It may reflect who you are, but it's not who you are. So then, of course, the problem is, how could we attribute anything of that type of divine omnipotence to something outside of Atzmus. Comes the Alter Rebbe and Mechadish Iyar. The word Iyar exists in Kabbalah. As a matter of fact, Chassidus explains why the word Iyar, not Shefa, and so on. But what does he explain? That the word Iyar Ein Sof, that you could say Iyar Ein Sof, you know why? Because Iyar, of its bittul. Ratzon does not indicate bittul. Ratzon just indicates it's a tool, so to speak. Iyar indicates a certain type of field of energy, you can say, that carries the properties of divine omnipotence. And how could you say something outside of Atzmus that carries such a thing? Because it's not outside. It doesn't have any entity. Iyar, by definition, doesn't have anything of its own. Because it has nothing of its own, or using the expression that we heard once from the Rebbe, bittul, kenish bottle, then it's bittul. Kol in yoni of Iyar is bittul. Because of its lack of identity, it can carry, so to speak, the non-existential built-in Metzias Nimtza Dika Kadmus of Atzmus into the world of Metzias Nimtza and not be anything outside of us. So it's basically having two elements in it. That it is something that's not Atzmus, but something that's not Atzmus either. Ratzon, you can't say that. So what is the Chiddush? Is finding a way of explaining to Anoshim Kerkenu, to people like ourselves, a dimension that is divine field of energy that does not have definition, because Iyar does not have definition yet. In this Iyar, in this field of energy, you will then have the first Kedem Alei Saratzin, before God desires, and the arousal of desire, and then the levels that come after that. But now you've established that there's a certain type of transference from Atzmus to Iyar, with Iyar still being an extension of Atzmus, and still being Me'en HaMoyer. It's an example, obviously, we see it in the light of our lives. Obviously, the example of sunlight or the example of the light or the energy of the soul are not adequate. But when you look at many different examples, you begin to get a taste of something that God imparted into existence through Iyar. But it has to be Iyar. It has to be something that does not have its own identity. That's briefly the concept. And in the words of Aveda, it means that you can connect to this level of Iyar when you have bittul. If there's any element of your identity, which is important as well, but identity cannot connect to something that's beyond identity. It has to be a form of Iyar. So when Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, Hareini nos chveidecha, show me your face, your glory. And God says, no man can see me and live. And then he says, and the Rebbe explains in the Sikha, Tainis Esther, Tavshim Memches, and we have it today also from the Ponim Yofis, brings it, the Baal HaFlaw. He says that what? Re'isas acherai uponai, you see my back and my face, but ponai you see through lo yiro. That's what it means. You could see my face, but you can't see it directly. There are things you can see directly, but that's not Atzmus. You want to experience Atzmus, the face of Atzmus, the pnimius Atzmus, it has to be by not looking. That's the experience. You have to negate your identity, and then you can experience it. Which is why when Moshe said, the Gemara says, that the Eibishter says in Berachos, the Gemara says, when I wanted to show you my face by the sneh, by the burning bush, you did not want to look. And now you want to see it? Now I won't show it to you. So the Rebbe asks a famous question, what does that mean? What is this, a game? Tit for tat? When you wanted to see, when I wanted to show you, you didn't want to see. Now I won't show you. No, because when you wanted to see, it was when I wanted to show it to you, it's on my terms. Now you want to see it on your terms. That not. So that's an Aveda, an element where you completely sublimate, completely free yourself, what we call being in the zone, and you're not sensing. As soon as you're conscious of it, it's already not it. So to experience Atzmus on that level, you have to almost not be conscious of it, and then you have it. As soon as you get conscious, it's already a level below. So Iyar is that state where it is it, but you can't be aware or in any way conscious of it, if I could put it in those terms, some way that you can express it. This can require more explanation, but if anyone wants more explanation, please write, and I will definitely elaborate. But there is that element. Just to give one example, for example, if someone asks you right now, what is your left leg doing? So until I said left leg, you didn't know what it was doing, right? But it was there. Because you weren't aware of it. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. So there's an element, it's just a taste, an example, where something can be a complete real experience, but the awareness of it is already some type of identity. So Iyar is Kadum Kekadmusa, Iyar, the Chiddush of Iyar of the Alter Rebbe, is that it's Iyar because it's Me'en HaMoyer. And that's why it's Ein Sof. Not Ein Sof because it's infused And God imparted Ein Sof because that brings up the questions I brought before. So now you have a place where we can meet Atzmus, but in a place where it comes on somewhat in a reality that we can relate to, not on our terms, on Atzmus terms, but we can somewhat relate to it. Which of course is the foundation of Chassidus, the interface that Chassidus creates, being able to have that type of full partnership, full unity. Now, we'll do the 3 essays. The 3 essays of the new contest of this year, 2016. These are all in the top 10, so they're all excellent essays. As I said, fraction of points distinguish between a winner and the next stage. So the first one is a Chassidic take on the 4-letter word. Actually, let me begin in the order, the proper order. That will be the last one. The first one is Encountering You by Ricky Winner, age 21, Brooklyn, New York. An excellent, well-written essay about who is you, who are you? And of course, that's the big question, and puts in a very, very, very good contemporary context. I enjoyed reading this essay personally, and talk about self-esteem, self-definition. The buzzword of 20th century psychology promises to solve a myriad of issues. High self-esteem was linked to greater success, a better work ethic, and healthy relationships. And then goes and explores Chassidus, how Chassidus looks at self-esteem in an entirely different way. What really defines and makes us, and actually uses the ideas of Iyar Ein Sof, and of course Chelik Elikam Mal Mamash and Tanya, in a very original and beautiful way presented the empowerment of what really makes us who we are. And that sense of you turns the whole thing on its head and gives us an ability, an empowerment, which allows us to really take on the challenges of life. So well recommended, very well done, and I congratulate you for that. Next essay. The next essay is a Hebrew one. Know how to listen, or on mentoring, listening to connect and hearing between the lines. The role of the Mashpia. In Hebrew, Mohuse shel Mashpia, hina ladas lahakshiv al manas lichber. So basically, it's about a very good essay based on Chassidus of how one is to listen. How does a mentor connect and bond? He distinguishes between the difference between identifying with someone and empathizing with someone. In other words, where do you draw the line, what secular psychology calls transference, where you become over-identified that you can't help the person. But on the other hand, you don't want to be detached. So how do you get that type of empathy without over-identification so you're still able to retain objectivity to help that given situation? That's the gist of it, but bring many different places in Chassidus from the Rebbe. Very interesting stuff, some stuff I have not seen before, especially communicated in this fashion. And all about that ability to empathize, that ability to really relate to another. And it's a great, obviously practical to people being mashpim, finding a mashpia, finding someone who listens and is able to listen and relate to you and advise accordingly. And finally, the third essay for this week, a Chassidic take on the 4-letter word, which is love, by Avremel Vogel, age 24, Brooklyn, New York. I should mention that the previous essay in Hebrew, I didn't mention the name, Mishael El Malem, age 38, in Jerusalem. And this is Avremel Vogel, age 24, Brooklyn, New York. Okay. Love, probably the single most abused word in the modern world. In secular circles, it gets flung around like the words hello and goodbye, and goes on. In Orthodox circles, it doesn't get used enough. Like it or not, love is the craze of the modern world. And goes into understanding love from the Chassidus point of view, obviously. Bringing a quote from the Oxford Dictionary, love as a noun is an intense feeling of deep affection. As a verb, it's to feel a deep romantic attachment to someone or something. And bringing Tanya, Perek Lamed Beis, of course, but also addressing love in the context of respect, because there's also Ava, there's Yira. In Perek Mem Aleph of Tanya, the respect. Can there be love without respect? So it's a very practical take on what love really is, and how we sometimes in our own narrow way define love, when in truth that's not really love, and gives a few case studies. So it's a great essay in that sense of translating the ideas of Chassidus into and especially also including love between us and Hashem into Beinod Mechaveri, love of spouses, love between human beings. And I definitely recommend this essay as well. So with that, we do the 3 essays that we've covered, and I want to now conclude by saying everyone should have a very meaningful week. And this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 115. Until next Sunday, and like every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. It's an honor to share a few words, and everyone be blessed. Thank you.